It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Frank Krulicki. Hi, Frank. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on. My pleasure to have you on the show. So we're going to be talking about your book. Your book is called House of Wonders. This is a graphic novel. Is that correct?
Yes, it is a 88-page original graphic novel, sci-fi, superhero, action, adventure.
Okay. I'm looking at your bio. This is interesting. It says you sold your first script to DC Comics at 16, and yet it still hasn't been printed. So they paid you for it, and then they stuck it on a shelf, and it's still there?
As far as I know, they don't tell you when it gets into a magazine. It could have been used as a filler. I have no idea. It was exciting. I was a kid. I collected comic books all my life. So you had the old typewriter. I'm typing it with my two fingers, send tons of stuff in, a pile of rejection letters. Finally get accepted. I'm excited. Get sent a check. I don't know. It was small, $45 maybe.
Well, listen,
$35.
Yeah.
And then they gave me some advice on how to improve and try again. But then I got involved with hockey, and I kind of let it slide. I never did anything with it, and I regret that to this very day. Found out later, guys like Jim Shooter and Roy Thomas and Len Wein, who are big names in the industry back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they started out when they were 14, 15, and 16. Now today, that just doesn't happen. But yeah, so that's my claim to fame.
Okay. Well, it's funny. That seems to be the modus operandi of a lot of places, not just comics and publishers, but also in the movies. I just tell you a quick story. I had a woman on who wrote a novel that got picked up by Paramount. They wanted the rights to it to make it a full-blown movie. They were going to star Cameron Diaz as the lead. They wrote her a check for $400,000, and then they had a big shake-up, and all of the executives in this particular division of Paramount got fired. And her project went on the shelf. She's never heard from him since. So she got $400,000 just for nothing. And I thought, wow, if you could just do that a few times.
Oh, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Netflix, if you're listening, you want to buy the House of Wonders, go for it. Whether you make it or not, I'm available.
Well, but the thing is that it would have been exclusive to them had they had, followed through with this whole thing. So she got the check for $400,000, and then the contract became null and void. She was free to go sell it somewhere else and still keep the money.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of comic book creators, and they show me reams of stuff that they've been paid for, but will never see the light of day because, for whatever reason, an editor changed, or the publisher changed, or the editor-in-chief changed, and they just are moving on. And so it's like they got the money, but their creation never sees the light of day. I want to see my creation see the light of day. That's why I'm doing this. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, you can take the money and be happy, but you want to see it, right? That's your baby. And, it just shows you who's got the money, and whether they have any brains or not remains to be seen. But, okay, so this one, House of Wonders, now, it says 36 years later. So if I do my math and I don't screw it up, that makes you 52?
Very close, yep.
Okay.
Very close, yep.
So what did you do between 16 and 52?
Well, I played some hockey. Then I became a school teacher. Then I went into the pastorate. I became a pastor.
Oh.
And I've been pastoring for over 30 years. Never losing my love of comics. I sold my first collection to pay for my bachelor's. I sold my second collection because I started collecting again to pay for my master's. And now I'm retired, stepped away from being a pastor. So I've always written in some form or another, whether it's articles or sermons or whatever you want to call it. But I've always maintained my love for the nerd culture in comic books. I'm an odd duck. I'm a square peg in a round hole, and that's what this book really is about. It's about community. It's about not fitting in, and the theme is what is different. Everyone's different, Douglas. And why is it that we make fun of other people who are quote unquote different? I was different growing up. Being a pastor is different. I look different. Whatever. But at the end of the day, what is it within humanity that drives us to tease one another? In high school, we all had those cliques,
right.
Casts, if you want to call them, the jocks, the beauty queens, the nerds, whatever. And we always got picked on, but we always tried to find someone, quote unquote, lower than us to pick on. We were getting picked on and we felt terrible, but then we decided to do the same to others. And I think there's a sense of we fear what we don't understand. And that drives a lot of this. So this book is not a religious book. This is a whole different universe for me. I've stepped out of that for now. I've retired. I'm focusing my last years on trying to get back into comic books and writing and stuff. But the theme is about belonging. It's about community. It's about family. It's my life story if I were an alien born on a different planet. Which I wasn't, but just in case, this is my story. And so I just want to tell the story. I think it's timely. I think it's good for where we are today. It has some great themes, but it's not preachy. It's a fun-loving adventure, science fiction story. I'm a fan of the 1980s era comic books. That's when it was less dark then. The comic books were lighter in tone, still serious, but not as dark as they are today in some examples. And so this is an homage to the 1980s era. All my favorite comic books kind of cumble together into one to tell a great story about a kid who finds out he's an alien, stranded on a planet, realizes that's why he doesn't fit in, and that he's needed. But he doesn't want to do it alone. He could do it all by himself, but because he wants family and he wants community, he gets all his friends together who've been looking after him, who are all superheroes themselves, and they go and they fight the evil bad guy Veer Magnus, and so it's a great story.
Okay, let me ask you something about comic books generally speaking, because I'm not an expert. You had mentioned that your favorite era for comic books was the 1980s. Well, what's different about the 1980s comic books versus, say, the ones in the 1950s?
I would say just the depth. So in the 1950s, I just started rereading the Fantastic Four from issue number 1 online. And the stories are so simplistic. They leaps in logic that don't even make sense. You don't know how they get from A to B. The backgrounds of the images are just a solid one color. And so it's just the people and some buildings are drawn. In the 80s, you have a real story, a story arc, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It makes sense. There's pathos. There's cliffhangers. There's bunny trails that go all over that will tie back in 7 issues later. And the art has become much more detailed. Okay. So that's the difference between, I'd say, the 50s and the 80s. Well, and then even much more so today.
Wasn't the idea, though, in the 50s that comic books were for kids? And then at some point that shifted to they're sort of for everybody.
Oh, for sure. And I think Marvel Comics led the way into that shift. National Periodics, which became DC Comics, who put out Superman and Batman, they were nonsensical. They're like funny books, right? But Marvel, under Stan Lee, he wanted to bring in a deeper meaning. And so he started that around the 60s, 70s, where you saw that shift happening. And so Marvel led the way, and then DC followed, and then you have all these other companies that joined the bandwagon later down the road.
I know some of the old comic books are worth a fortune if they're in good shape. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Superman 1 is the most expensive one out there. Is that correct?
Almost.
Almost?
Action Comics #1, which is the first appearance of Superman.
Oh, okay.
It sells. I think the last copy sold for over $10 million.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But
there's
they have to be
only 100 known to exist.
They have to be like pristine, though, right?
Not necessarily. The more pristine they are, the more value they are. But a low grade Action Comics #1 will still fetch you six figures because they're so rare.
Yeah.
Like only 100 copies are still known to be in existence.
What year did that come out?
You're testing my metal. I'm going to say 1933, but other people may correct me on that.
33. Oh.
I think so.
How long have comic books been around? I didn't think they went back that far.
Oh, yeah, they go back a long, long ways, back to the 20s. There's a comic book website called Comic Book Resources. There's a gentleman on there called Brian Cronin, and he does a lot of the history. So he writes articles about the history of comic books. And, one of the very first real comic books was actually, it was just a store trying to sell advertisement. And so they just hired a bunch of artists and writers to draw funny cartoons, packaged it with their advertising, and gave it away in their stores. And that really was the first comic book, and that would have been in the 20s.
Oh, okay. So the process for you then is you write the story and then pass it off to an illustrator?
Yeah, exactly right. And I'll just jump in and say this, because I know we'll get calls. I'm sure we'll get calls. It was 1938 that Action Comics #1 came out. So,
38.
Yeah, so I wrote this story. I've been working on it in my head for a long time, trying to get this idea out. And then 2 years ago, my wife and I rented a cabin on the lake, and she said, "What are you going to do in your retirement?" I said, "I don't know, maybe write comics." And she said, "Well, now's the time to start." So we kind of worked out the plot and fleshed it out, wrote the first chapter, and then I started looking for an artist. And I found this gentleman in Spain, and I'm so fortunate. His name is Alberto Crespo. This guy is about to blow up. He's on the verge of greatness. He also tried breaking in when he was younger, didn't have the skills. As he grew up, he became a painter, and he is featured in galleries all around Europe.
Wow.
Quite successfully. And he decided at a later age, like myself, to try again. And so he'd been showing his portfolio around to different companies and got some nibbles. He hooked up with me, read my script, loved it. I loved his work, and we're working together. And his stuff is fantastic. He does the penciling, the inking, and the coloring. And then we have another gentleman by the name of Corey Breen, and he has worked and continues to work for all the major companies. He's our letterer and our book designer, and he's also a fledgling artist. So he's done an extra cover for our book for us. And it's been a great team. We've worked together for the last year. It's all finished. It's completely done. We just have to publish it. So we're getting the word out. We're doing this Kickstarter to fund the first phase as a proof of concept. And then the goal is to get it into all the comic book shops, into all the bookshops across North America, and we'll go from there.
I'm trying to make a parallel to music because I'm a musician. And just hypothetically, okay, I write a song and I've got the lyrics and I've got the music. Now I've got to find some musicians to put this thing all together onto a recording. Generally speaking, if I wanted to keep everything for myself, I would just pay them as musicians for hire, where they wouldn't necessarily have any credit on the album. In your case, you write the story. Do you pay the illustrator up front, or does he share in the spoils once the comic book goes out? How does that work?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different ways to do it. The way I chose to do it, because I'm a virtual unknown within this industry, and I need to get my name out. I can't pitch something to DC or Marvel because they're like, we need to see what you've done. I'm like, well, I'm trying to show you. No, go and do it first, and then we'll see it. Crazy.
Yeah, I know. I know that one.
So I paid Alberto Crespo for hire.
Okay.
My art, and I paid him a page rate, and it was a good rate, and he got paid for it. But because he has gone over and above, once we recoup any losses from the book, then he will start getting a bit of a royalty. So he has a bit of a royalty. So this takes off. Netflix buys it. He gets a small piece of it.
Oh, okay.
Corey Breen, our letterer, because he does so much for other companies, he said, no, just pay me my rate and we'll be good. And so we've done that with him. And that's how it's going to work. Now, if this is successful, and we're really close to getting it funded, we're looking for a book 2 and a book 3. Now our contract may change, and that's okay, because the more success you have, sometimes you have to make those changes. And if at the end of the day this is the only thing we do together, so be it. Alberto, I think, is going to be really busy coming up here with some work from the big companies, because he's garnering a lot of interest for his art right now.
Is the book out now?
It's not out yet. So we're doing a Kickstarter. A Kickstarter is a source crowdfunding platform, and it's a proof of concept. It shows people that there's interest in it. And so what we're doing is we're raising $6,000 minimum to basically pay for the first run printing. Everybody who backs it will get a copy of the book. There's other choices they can choose from. They can choose to get a physical copy of the book or a digital copy of the book. They can actually choose different covers that were drawn by different artists. I was so fortunate to secure Emmy Award-winning artist Chuck Patton. He won Emmys for his work on Spawn, the cartoon for Netflix.
Oh, okay.
He has drawn a special cover for this. And so you can go on to the Kickstarter and choose that as your option, to have that on that cover as opposed to another cover. I have Mark McKenna, who is he's a legend for DC and Marvel for the 1980s and 90s. He's still working for them. And he's done a cover, he's willing to do commissions, original art for people who want to click that as their reward option. I have Walden Wong, who is another legend within the comic book community, doing the same thing, commission pieces of original art that you pay for, and they'll send it to you as part of this Kickstarter. So as we raise the funds, what we're doing is we're going to do the first press run. And then I've got guys behind the scene working for me, guys I think you know, and they take that book and say it's done now, and then they shop it around and they get it into bookstores and comic book shops. That's the avenue we've chosen to do. There's other ways to do it, but for me, who's a novice really in this industry right now in their eyes, this is the best way to do it, I think.
Okay, so the release date is not set yet.
No, we have 12 more days to raise $6,000. Then in March, it'll be printed, and it'll be in people's hands by the end of March. By the end of March.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Well, Frank, we got to wind this down. Thanks so much for coming on. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes. cuttingedgecomics.ca. cuttingedgecomics.ca. You can go there. There's a Kickstarter link you can hit to get to the Kickstarter to raise the money. So our goal is $6,000 minimum. We're $850 away. We got 12 days left. Any money over and above that, we start doing add-ons, free stuff for everyone.
Oh,
bookmarks,
okay.
Buttons, T-shirts, you name it. It'll be there. So we want to get the number as high as we can, but we're really close. Only $850. I would ask your viewers, your listeners, log into Kickstarter, go to my website, find the House of Wonders. Even if you're just going to back it for $10 at a digital level, everything helps. But there's a lot of stuff you can choose from.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for coming on this show. It was nice talking to you, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Douglas. I appreciate you taking the time having me on.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on The Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to The Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Casey Griffin. Hi, Casey. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me on the show today.
Did I pronounce your last name right? Griffin?
You did.
Okay.
Yeah, Griffin.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you with us. You are an award-winning author based in Southern California. Which awards have you won? There's so many for writing. You know, if you were an actor, I'd say, oh, you won an Oscar or an Emmy if you were on TV. You know, there's only a couple of them, but for writers, there's like a million of them.
That's true. That is true. And actually, most of my writing awards to date are for nonfiction. So in my day job, I'm a science communicator, writer and editor, and I've won regional and national awards for my science writing about biology, medicine, astronomy, kind of the range. Fiction, I'm just starting to get my fiction career going, so hopefully there will be awards in the future.
So why did you decide to start writing fiction?
It's funny, actually, when I was a kid, I started writing fiction pretty much as soon as I could write, and I wrote all kinds of stories, always with a science fiction or fantasy element, pretty much up until college. And then once I hit college, I had writer's block for years in terms of creative writing. And I think part of it was trying to figure out my life, my career, where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. So I switched my focus to nonfiction writing and really honed that over several years. And I built a career I was really proud of. And then I came back to fiction writing years later, which was always kind of my first interest and my passion. So it's only the last few years I've been able to dive into some of these fiction stories I've been wanting to write for a long time. And that's been really rewarding and exciting.
So the series that you've been writing is Melinda West. How many books are in that series now?
So this is the debut book coming out in February. It's called Melinda West, Monster Gunslinger. And I've actually written several short stories that have been published in magazines across the country and also across the world, featuring these characters. And I got a lot of positive reception about this Weird West kind of idea and world. So I wrote a novel, and that's what's coming out in February. And I'm working on the second novel now, which will hopefully go smoothly.
Oh, I see. This is a new series. Okay. So
that's right. Yeah.
What are some of your other series that are out now?
So this is actually my first full-length book, but I've mostly focused on short stories. So I've had dozens and dozens of short stories published in magazines, anthologies, podcasts, mostly science fiction, fantasy, Weird West, and horror. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, so
yeah,
all of these titles that I'm looking at here, these are all short stories. These are
That's
correct.
Okay. So they're anthologies or magazines. Yep. So this is my debut novel coming out in February.
What is chromophobia? I've never heard of that.
So that is fear of color. And that's a really fun anthology, which is focused around upcoming women of horror writers. And there's a theme for each color. So I did a short story around the color green, with the themes of kind of envy. It takes place near a swamp. That is a really fun collection. I recommend checking out.
Is that a real thing, chromophobia?
I guess it is. Maybe some people have it. I don't know if you've seen the new Wednesday Addams show, but she definitely has a aversion to color.
Oh, okay. From the Addams Family. I haven't seen the new one, but I remember the character from the original one. And, that whole thing was black and white, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think that whole family was void of color.
Exactly.
Definitely. Yep. Okay. So tell us a little bit about the Melinda West Monster Gunslinger. What genre does this book kind of fall into?
Yeah, it's an interesting genre. I call it the Weird West, which basically means the Old West, but with some kind of supernatural or fantastical element. So this would be the Old West with, fantasy genre crossover. Horror is a really common crossover. Science fiction. You might be familiar with the Cowboys and Aliens movie. That would be an example of Weird West. So this is a Weird West novel where it's an alternate Old West where monsters kind of took over the region and people had to band together against these creatures. And we have a gunslinging couple in their 20s. They're Bonnie and Clyde-like, and they exterminate these monsters. So similar to the Witcher Ghostbusters kind of feel. They track down creatures that range from cannibalistic gremlins to giant flying scorpions. And in this book, they accidentally release a demon on one of their adventures, and this demon steals souls. And they find they're in over their heads. And they have to battle a menagerie of monsters and hunt a notorious outlaw to save their friends and stop a supernatural war. So this is sort of the first in the series to kick off their bigger adventures.
Do you know how many books are going to be in this series, or do you just keep writing till you run out of ideas?
My plan is to keep writing. I already have outlines for the next two, so hopefully at least three, but I sort of imagine their adventures going on for as long as I can write.
Okay. You have a publisher for these, right?
That's right. It's Brigid's Gate Press, which is a indie press, and they have a lot of great titles out, and they're rapidly growing also, which is exciting.
Well, the reason I ask that is because publishers tend to like series because then they can do a quick follow-up if the book really does well, the first book. Then they want a second book very quickly, which doesn't always happen if you only have one. But if you're already working on the second one, they tend to like that.
Yeah, and readers, I think, really respond to series as well. So that's also, I think, part of the draw, right? When you find a world and characters you like, you want to keep reading about them.
Tell us just a little bit more about Melinda, the specific character. Is she a human, or does she have weird powers, or what does she do?
So right now, she's a human. She's a stoic sharpshooter, and I kind of framed her in the kind of archetype cowboy figure you typically see in Old West, but with the gender swap. So she's kind of stoic. She's really good with her guns. She's just, trying to exterminate these monsters because she herself dealt with a tragedy when her mother died from a monster infection when she was younger. So after that, she started training, and she's just determined to take out as many of these monsters as she can. And contrasting her is her partner and boyfriend, Lance, who's kind of easygoing, charismatic. So they're a fun couple with an interesting contrast, and they meet all kinds of characters and have lots of adventures.
The only Western female figure that I can think of right off the bat is Annie Oakley. It's the only one that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there were others,
That's right,
but she seems to be the only one that made any notoriety.
Right. It's interesting because there are so many fascinating women figures from the Old West, but their stories aren't really told. You tend to think of Billy the Kid and all these other iconic figures, and those are the ones that are rehashed kind of in movies and books. So my goal for this story and for the series, aside from creating an entertaining adventure that's just kind of fun and monster-filled, I really wanted to reframe some of these popular depictions of the Old West to feature a diversity of identities. So, for example, women characters are almost always the wife, the farm girl, the prostitute. So I really wanted women characters who are the outlaw, the peacemaker, the sheriff, like just a world where that is more the norm. So that was really kind of refreshing and fun for me to do. And then also with other identities, just making sure they're well represented, because there are all these real life accounts in history of, black cowboys and women gunslingers, and that's all kind of lost. So I definitely draw some inspiration from real life history, which is fun as well.
I don't know why, but I'm getting this picture in my head of Twilight meets the Old West. Is it anything like that?
Interesting. It is, but without the love triangle. So I really wanted to focus on the adventures and kind of have this relationship between the characters established already without sort of the romance drama, which, I know is a draw for a lot of readers, but just for me, I just wanted their relationship to be straightforward, so there's no love triangle or anything like that. I mean, they have kind of the normal challenges that a healthy couple would have, so that is sort of sprinkled in, but in terms of Twilight, definitely the monster aspect, I would say, is a fit there.
Okay, so Melinda and her boyfriend, you said, or husband, they're already
her boyfriend.
Her boyfriend. Okay, they're already established.
Yeah,
coming into the book. Yeah,
it's honestly kind of unusual for books. Like usually, and I actually got some early feedback from agents that don't have them together yet. Let's have it kind of build up, but it just didn't feel right. So I don't know. We'll see how that resonates with readers.
Well, there's so many genres and subgenres that if you started adding romance, then you're into a whole nother realm of requirements, aren't you? Like it has to have a happy ending, otherwise it can't be called a romantic novel.
That's right. I think so, yeah, as a traditional romance. And that is probably the one genre I haven't explored at this point. But I think that's correct, yeah.
I think people are making up their own genres these days, especially with self-publishing. Because I've seen some just wild, I can't even remember the names, but just they've taken, 5 or 6 traditional genres and kind of split them up into subgenres and sub-subgenres. And I don't know that a traditional publisher would even go near it, but it's probably a pretty interesting book when you start seeing these really bizarre genres.
Yeah, it can be fun, for sure, to see these kind of mashups of things you wouldn't normally think of. And I think that also speaks to the strength of kind of the indie publishing world. There's a lot of freedom and creativity that is just really fun that, you can't always do in traditional publishing.
Well, that's true. And, I've heard mixed opinions about self-publishing, versus traditional publishing. There is stuff out there that probably shouldn't be. However, I think that's par for course with anything that's been opened up, where if they make it available to everyone, you're not going to have the greatest book ever written all the time. It's just not going to happen.
Right. You know, that's actually why I like indie publishing, independent publishing, and why I went that route, because it's in between traditional publishing and self-publishing, right? It's where you work with a small independent publisher. So it's not kind of me publishing my own book, but me actually going to a publisher. You know, it's not one of the big New York publishers, but they are legitimate. They put out books, and getting that kind of expertise as an author is very helpful. And, you know, the nitty-gritty of book publishing, the marketing, all of those aspects, but then still having the freedom to do interesting stories and titles. Also, independent publishers tend to be on a faster timeline, which is nice. So, you know, being able to publish your book within a year of acceptance, as opposed to waiting several years, is also an advantage.
Oh, definitely. Definitely true. Okay. Anything else you want to bring up before we wind this down?
I think I covered everything. Is there anything else you'd like me to speak on?
Well, I had two questions, and then we can wrap it up. Number one is the book. Yeah. The book is coming out when?
It's coming out in February, and pre-order is in a few weeks.
Pre-order in a few weeks. Okay. And the last question is, do you have a website you want to give out?
Yeah, I do. It's Casey Grifant. So my full name, CaseyGrifant.com. And I'm also on all of the social networks with that same handle, Casey Grifant. So happy for people to reach out and connect.
Well, Casey, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice talking to you, and we look forward to your book launch in February.
Thank you so much. It was fun.